Greetings and welcome back to another iteration of MGTOW Talks. It is I, the High Lord of Vows of Poverty and Wallowing in Filth and Misery, once again here with our friend Coltaine, the High Chief of the Wombat Containment Unit in Australia. And there's a lot of ground to cover, folks. Recently, RBK made a video addressing primarily me, and then he goes off into a tangent about circumcision. I won't talk about that. About an older video I made where I say and where I argue you shouldn't be arguing with feminists or don't argue with feminists. I first want to explain my position on that, have Coltaine weigh in on that, and then we're gonna cover systematically things like gynocentrism, evolutionary psychology, and finally biological determinism. Now, perhaps I should have qualified this video in the beginning when I made that video by saying this is what my channel is, this is what I do on my channel. But let me make it clear once and for all to hear, and hopefully I don't have to keep repeating this over and over, that I am not an MRA. I am not an anti-feminist. I am not an activist. The purpose of my channel and my way of helping men is pursuing knowledge, exploring different avenues of knowledge, opening up my mind and their minds to new ways of thinking, and in particular, understanding themselves as human beings, as human apes, as well as understanding their female counterparts. That is my sole concern, more or less, with my channel. I try to understand the world, and I want to help other men understand it as well. And sometimes those subjects I cover are not related to gender relations, and sometimes they are, but it's all part of the same puzzle, if you will. Now, given that context, perhaps I should have said when I made that video, here is what the kinds of videos I make and this is what I represent. But once again, I am not an MRA, I'm not an activist, I'm not an anti-feminist. Within that context, that was a recommendation, not a dictate, another straw man you often hear about me. I don't dictate to men what they should or should not do. You can argue with feminists if you want, but if you're primarily taking the path I've taken, which is completely optional, you can choose that path or not, then you are focused on acquiring knowledge, and getting into hissy, screaming fits with feminists is a waste of time. I just want to clarify my position on that before we move on to other things. But once again, my channel is meant to be a repository of knowledge and exploration. That is pretty much my sole concern. I'm not interested in activism. I'm not an anti-feminist. I'm not a men's rights advocate. I am interested in helping men by helping them understand themselves and the world that they live in. So, Coltaine, please.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's bothered me about this, I mean, to put it into context, it's not just you. I mean, his last video was a 3-hour tirade against Girl Writes What over, a couple of comments that she left on a previous video. He seems to have, I mean, he's gone out of his way to try and discredit Girl Writes What, now you, for some reason, which reasons I can only guess at. He seems to be avoiding commenting on Barbarossa, despite the fact that Barbarossa has made videos wherein he basically says the exact same thing as you do. Stop arguing with women, stop arguing with feminists. It's pointless. It's a waste of time. All they do is deflect. They have no interest in logic or justice. Between the three of you, I mean, you three, like you, Barbarossa, and Girl Writes What, for the most part, really laid the groundwork for the modern MGTOW philosophy. All the concepts that underpin the philosophical side of MGTOW, like male mother need and Briefo's law, dominance hierarchies, all of that sort of stuff. And there seems to be a trend at the moment where there's a lot of people in the MGTOW community arguing against that biological determinist type, or they're arguing against that group of MGTOW who base their theories in biology. My problem is that if you if you reject those underlying concepts, if you reject behavioral biology and evolutionary psychology, and by association, all of the underpinnings of MGTOW that relate to that, like hypergamy and hypoagency and things, what are you actually left with? If you take that stuff away and sort of take razor blade candy as an example of what he thinks MGTOW should look like, what you're left with is a channel with 6 hours worth of flame war videos against Janet Bloomfield, and 3 hour long diatribes about who says what in some comment thread. I've been thinking this for a while. I think that RBK is not primarily MGTOW. He may well be going his own way, but he has no interest in MGTOW as a way to explore or understand, human behaviors that drive the problems that we see. The more I see of his stuff, the more I think RBK is actually an MRA who is simply dissatisfied with the way the mainstream MRM and specifically AVFM are doing things.
I think that might be accurate, and I'm not going to. I think RBK is going his own way, but I think it's clear that his concerns, his sphere of interest, is very different from mine. And so you really have a kind of an asymmetry in what he's addressing that particular video that I made a while back. As I said, I have very different interests, and I have these interests don't really overlap with RBK's for the most part. And as you pointed out, when you get rid of all of the essentially scientific underpinnings of what has gone into MGTOW philosophy, essentially the things that expanded MGTOW beyond the usual, the court system's against you, the government's against you, don't get married because it sucks. You're not left with much. And what I see a lot of, even in the MGTOW community, is explanations that come down to it's just cultural, social conditioning, this or that. And the problem with this is it's the same problem that theists might have with an argument for God. You end up with, it's a God did it argument, and you end up with an infinite regress. And at some point in time in that regress, you will have to address the origin of things. Now, if you just say it's all culture, first off, culture is not even defined here. And even Barbarossa's gone on record as saying that biology precedes culture. And I made a video a few months back, I believe the title, if I remember correctly, is Society is What We Are. Now, the implications of that title are pretty powerful. That means that whatever society we have will, of course, be variable, but it's going to be a reflection of the biological conditions that led to the evolution of our species, human apes, Homo sapiens, along the record of time. So you will get variation. You will get different kinds of societies. You'll get Amazonian societies where the men are butchering each other, for the sake of dominance hierarchy reasons and what have you. And you'll get highly civilized societies with little violence and things that seem so deviant that they couldn't possibly fit into the scheme of things, but they do. And usually you can find an explanation for these things. This is a false dichotomy people have been drawing. I think Turd Flinging Monkey has done this a bit as well. He usually makes very good videos, and in fact, I just think his line of reasoning is incorrect. You don't have culture on the one hand and biology on the other, and you just separate it. You don't have a culture without the biological underpinnings, just like in at least the contemporary understanding of MGTOW philosophy, without all of this stuff and all of the material and all of the knowledge we've tried to work on and spread, you're left with basically nothing. You're left with, fuck it, man, the court system's against you, don't get married. And I suppose that's a good enough reason. Now, in your video...
Well,
yes, please.
Well, specifically on that, the way, and I actually responded to RBK's, left a response on RBK's video. He hasn't written back or anything. I don't know if he will, but to me, getting rid of those underpinnings is kind of in the same, it's kind of similar to how you can be an atheist and be completely ignorant of all the theology and science surrounding the question of God's existence. You don't need to know that stuff. If you lack, I mean, it could just simply be that you were, you grew up inside a basement and you never saw the light of day and you were never exposed to theological concepts. That person is an atheist. They lack a belief in a God. But then the question becomes, what type of atheist do you want to be? Do you want to be an ignorant atheist, or do you want to be an atheist whose understanding, like whose beliefs are constructed on an understanding of reality? I mean, that's my problem with getting rid of these concepts, is you end up, yes, you can go your own way without knowing these concepts, but it seems to me to be a position of ignorance. And I think the argument that, against them trying to excise these concepts would be similar to saying to an atheist in the atheist community, don't worry about science, don't worry about skepticism. All you need to do is argue against Christians on cultural grounds. To me, I don't see the point of arguing with Christians on cultural grounds if you don't have a logical underpinning to say Christianity is factually wrong.
Indeed. And I think Gorowitz might point this out in a very old video of hers where she talks about atheism, how people started using, veering beyond atheism in terms of the evidentiary claims and just going to things such as, and we've talked about this briefly, well, if you look at the Old Testament, there seems to be support of slavery, and using essentially logical fallacies and emotional appeals of various sorts to persuade Christians. And once you veer into the emotional territory, and I think very much that, for better or worse, RBK has done that. And once again, there's very little overlap between the material he and I cover, so that may or may not be relevant. You're going to lose something, and it becomes susceptible to other things. I mean, you talked about this to some degree, or you actually, I should point this out, guys. Coltaine is back in full force. He has his channel again, and he made a very nice and excellent response video to Turflinging Monkey's video, and I'll be posting a link to his response. So please check that out. It's really good. And you cite an example from Deuteronomy there, in explaining that, rather countering the claim that gynocentrism is primarily social and cultural, which once again is unintentionally, I believe, creating a false dichotomy between culture and biology. And the description in Deuteronomy, paraphrasing, is basically kill all the men and take the booty. I don't mean literally the booty in some cases, and the women's booty, and the booty, the goods, the pillaged goods of war. Now, this is also gynocentrism. It's a different sort. It's a different kind, of course, that is best fitted into that particular period of history, 3,500 years ago, where the men are cut down and the women are kept as breeding resources. They still retain their lives, and most importantly, they're able to pass their genes, something a dead man cannot do. This seems radically different to the sort of white knighting we see in current society, but it is the same gynocentrism. Essentially, the origins of that behavior are the same as the origins we encounter today. Commentary?
Well, I mean, the way I think about it, particularly separating culture and biology, the way I like to think about it is similar to a computer system, where an ideology like an ideology like feminism, for example, would be software. Culture would be the operating system, and biology would be the hardware that it runs on. Now, if you take something like Photoshop, for example, I don't interact with Photoshop using ones and zeros, but that doesn't mean it isn't digital. Culture is an abstraction of biology, and we don't always need to think about everything in terms of, I mean, if you wanted to, you could go right down the rabbit hole and, go from culture to biology to cell division to the way, DNA replicates within, or like splits apart and joins back together inside the cell. You don't need to go that deep most of the time, but it is worth keeping in mind that culture is based on a foundation of biology. They don't exist in, what's the term? Like they don't exist parallel to each other. They're kind of hierarchical.
Exactly, and I've used the term many times, biological precedence. That simply means, and I'll explain it again, that given hundreds of millions of years of mammalian evolution, where this evolution had no culture, it was the grunting, fucking, reproduction, and dying of basically every other mammalian species. We had all of this going on in the background, and then way into the future. I mean, I'll be generous, say approximately 50,000 years ago, we see things such as, cave paintings. We see the sort of the emergence of something we might call a culture. I mean, it's impossible to imagine culture not having been influenced. I mean, you can intentionally claim that it's not influenced by that. All of the hardware, I've used this term in the past, that has gone into creating the human mammal that we are, and just sort of now we have culture. And unfortunately, this is an artifact and trick of language that feminists and particularly people on the left, and we can talk about this in a bit, use when they say, well, no, it's all conditioning, it's all social. And in this video, actually, he, not just this one, the one criticizing Girl Writes What, RBK also creates a kind of false dichotomy. On the one hand, you have the tabula rasa, the blank slate. On the other hand, you have biological determinism, and maybe it's a good time now to, if we're going out of order, but it doesn't really matter, to talk about what that means. I'll first explain my position on biological determinism. It might be different from yours, but I'll explain my position first. Now, before we go to biology, we can just talk about what determinism is. People have I believe, a grave misunderstanding of what a determined system is. A system where it exists within prior, based on prior cause. You could have a completely chaotic system where it's not predictability. Determinism has nothing in and of itself to do with predictability. You're still going to have determined causes. Now, that's what that is. It's quite simple. And if you add into the biology into the mixture, you're simply ascribing biological qualities to the causes that are bringing about certain kinds of behavior. Now, it just so happens that most of the time, deterministic systems are probabilistic. And within a probabilistic system, within a biologically probabilistic system, a large share of human beings are going to act in a certain way. Will they be predictable to a T on the micro level and the micro individual level? Of course not. But by and large, you can make predictions, and in fact, people have, and it's very effective. Politicians do it all the time. This does not mean that biological determinism is a straitjacket or a simply defeatism, as it's put. I mean, I think it just stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is. Unless you want to argue that we do not exist in a causal system that is determined by things, we might as well just shrug our shoulders and give up on understanding anything. Please, what's your view on this?
My view is pretty much the same. It's a causal system. That doesn't mean that we can necessarily predict everything in it. But, basically everything that happens is a result of causal factors. One thing leads to another. I think the computer analogy works just as well here, though, as well, because again, we can look at how things, like whether we can look at things in terms of the biochemistry within the cells. They are determined by the laws of physics. Really, they follow the same rules that every other chemical reaction does. Or we can abstract it and look at it in terms of psychological, like psychological strategies and behavior as well, where we can see general instincts and behaviors which, we don't necessarily have to go down the rabbit hole to the level of neurology or biochemistry to predict or explain. But yeah, I mean, it is all deterministic.
Yeah, and I think there's just a lot of conflation with sort of deterministic meaning, I guess, fatalistic, or, you can predict something or anything. A lot of people who try to riposte this will say, well, you know, I bet I could do something that you couldn't predict, as if that were a knockdown argument. No, determinism is simply a description of causal systems. And as I said, you could have a completely chaotic system that is still determined by prior cause, and that has nothing to do with predictability. It just so happens that, yes, within our pocket universe, if you will, most deterministic systems, particularly in a biologically deterministic system, it's going to be probabilistic, and thus
Yeah.
you can make certain calls and be pretty accurate about what you're calling out on within that system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a good example of this would be cellular automata. You've ever seen those little grid-based cellular automata type programs? Like the most common one that I've come across is Conway's Game of Life, where each cell has the cells basically have a set of rules. Like if there's less than 3 cells next to each other, they die out from low population. If there's more than 3 cells, they they die from overpopulation. If there's 3 cells and a empty cell, the empty cell will come alive, etc. Like, it's just a really simple set of rules, and it spawns incredibly complex, chaotic patterns that you wouldn't aren't necessarily predictable, but they do follow. Like, when I say they're not predictable, the simplest system that can predict these patterns is the system itself that runs through the simulation. But it is very much deterministic. It is following a set of rules.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't help but think that if it's possibly a good deal of the confusion simply comes down to language, where people hear deterministic and they think you mean it can be determined.
Yeah, yeah, and I think having been on YouTube for a while, even when I think I'm articulating myself rather clearly, the amount of confusion, conflation, and to be honest, bemusement is sometimes astounding. And yes, I'll be called an elitist for saying this, but there are many situations where I feel I'm expressing myself clearly, and I'll see in a comment section comments that ostensibly have nothing to do with the commentary I made, or just veer off in a direction where I just think, did you even watch the video? And this
Yeah.
happens on a constant basis. So even the best of circumstances, I think what people are approaching determinism from a very colloquial perspective. Oh, it's determined, and it means you can predict stuff, and whereas, for example, X determines Y. That's really simple, but that's a very simple example. But once again, determinism really in this context is, I've said this before, is probabilistic. And the fact is, we talked about before, the underpinnings of MGTOW philosophy and MGTOW knowledge and understanding, really, they would not exist if we did not live in a probabilistic system or a deterministic system, whatever makes you feel better. And if it in fact is simply confusion based on interpretation and misunderstanding of language, well, I think we've remedied that. I mean, calling biological determinism defeatism, and some of the things which I thought were straw men of positions of Girl Writes What in that video, which was a very long one. I mean,
I haven't finished watching it yet. I mean, Jesus, it's 3 hours long.
she is basically, I think, described reality as it is, and that's neither a defeatist position nor a particularly positive position. I think it's a neutral position. And
Yeah.
I think more importantly, these MGTOW talks and what she's doing, and none of our channels, none of the work that we do would even exist if somehow to us, biological determinism, if you will, were coterminous with let's just fucking give up and,
Mm.
spank off in the toilet all day. I mean, it's not. Obviously,
Yeah.
I have, as I said, my channel is a resource to men who seek knowledge and find knowledge fulfilling and enriching, and to help them better their lives. And Girl Writes What, I think, has helped enormous amounts of people, because she does feel, obviously, and I'm interpreting her behavior, that the spread and communication of knowledge is helpful. On the other hand, she sees what we're up against, which is just a mountain. And that might be a little bit euphemistic, but a mountain of stuff that most people don't even actively think about. I'm talking about all these instincts and what have you. And I think this leads us a little bit into the direction of, a lot of people do not just say Evo-Psych is fantastical and a bunch of bunk. Now, in that video of razor blade candies, he cites an example. I'm trying to remember as best as I can.
He cites an example from, Rebecca Watson, the authority on the issue.
Yeah, well, I wasn't even aware of that until you pointed it out to me,
Just-
regarding homosexuality. Now,
oh, is that I was thinking you were going to talk about the other one.
what was
He
the other one, please?
He cites an example that Rebecca Watson did, and he basically credits her. He's like, oh, I don't want to have to agree with Rebecca Watson, but here it is. And he basically gives an example of, I think it was humor, and he was saying how, evolutionary psychology is just a bunch of made up bunk, and the way it works is that an evolutionary psychologist will take something like why are women more humorous than men, and then basically make up a whole bunch of bullshit about our ancient ancestors to try and explain that. Um, Notwithstanding that what is humorous is entirely subjective. Um, there are a great many things about Evo-Psych that you do not need to make anything up to explain. Like the facts are just there.
Well, I was going to cite the example he brought, and I'm paraphrasing. An evolutionary psychologist offered a theory as to why we have homosexuality. Now, homosexuality is pretty mysterious. We still don't know the cause. My objection, as you just brought, now we know it's genetic. We know there's a neurological component to it. We know that.
We don't know that it's genetic. I think
We
most
know
of
it's a
the
neurological component to it, though.
we know there's a neurological component. It's very much biological, but from most of what I've seen, I believe the current thought at the moment is that it's due to an overabundance or lack of hormones during the pregnancy.
Okay, so it's in the
caused by stress. Yeah, it's epigenetic.
It's
rather
epigenetic.
than
Well, fair enough.
but it's still very much biological.
Right. But in any event, let's just say that RBK actually had debunked this particular theory of this evolutionary. He then proceeds to say, therefore, evolutionary psychology is bullshit. Now, in logic, and there will be a video at the beginning of next month covering logical fallacies. We call this a composition fallacy, whereas you take a part of the data set or part of data that may be incorrect in this case, and for the sake of argument, let's say RBK is correct, and you apply it to the whole. This is what we call composition fallacy. This is him debunking a particular theory by a particular evolutionary psychologist does not debunk the body of knowledge that has been acquired in the name of evolutionary psychology, and there is so much of it. And furthermore, our understanding of MGTOW philosophy has been bolstered and really primarily enhanced by that body of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean that homosexuality example is. I mean, if those were his two examples, I have huge problems with what he said. I mean, on the one, like, if his two examples are A, humor, which is entirely subjective, and secondly, homosexuality, which as I don't know which evolutionary psychologist was saying this, but as I said, most of the research out there seems to say that homosexuality isn't a genetic thing that was
Epigenetic.
selected for. It's epigenetic due to like hormone imbalances that can be caused by something like stress in the mother during the pregnancy. I mean, that's not something that's selected for, so it's not something that you would explain with evolutionary psychology.
Exactly, which renders his example, if that's the case, invalid.
Yeah, yeah, or both of his examples, in my opinion. I mean, to go back to, I mean, in the MGTOW talk we did a few weeks ago, I brought up the example of women in engineering and the fact that numerous studies show men can conceptualize objects in three-dimensional space better than women can on aggregate. That, that's not made up. That's a fucking fact. The studies support it. Second fact is that predators, predatory animals seem to have better eyesight and better conceptualization of, or better depth of field. Their eyes tend to point forward. Like if you look at predatory birds, cats, dogs, their eyes point forward, whereas like cows, deer, their eyes seem to be on the side of their heads. They want to maximize their field of view. So the predators have, a better conceptualization of space. And thirdly, we know that throughout human history, again, this is a fact. This isn't anything I have to, theorize or conjecture and make stuff up. We know that men did the majority of hunting. You put those three things together, the conceptualization of 3D space being better in men, the fact that men did the hunting, and the fact that all throughout nature we see that predatory animals have a better concept of space. That I don't need to make anything up about our previously, about what our ancestors might have done to explain humor or homosexuality. None of these three things are in contention. That basically gives us, at least the start for an evolutionary psychological explanation for why there are less women going into the field of engineering.
Yeah, yeah. And I think conversely, women who used to stay in the hearth and home, I mean, women usually have better communication skills. They usually are better reading facial expressions, etc. And that was something that developed over a long period of hundreds of thousands, millions of years because of their particular social circumstances. They did less hunting. They had much more interaction with each other, etc. You don't need to just pull stuff out of thin air to explain that. And then we most recently, as you pointed out, Barbarossa brought up a study of the handing over of Hong Kong, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean that's the second thing is that one of the big things about is something scientific. The question is, does it explain the evidence? And the second thing is, does it offer predictions? And yes, it does. I mean, you look at that hypergamy study for Hong Kong and China, where the Chinese women were marrying Hong Kong men, and the Hong Kong women, they wouldn't marry down to the poorer Chinese men. They had to expatriate themselves to find men that they considered, on their level.
Which I think...
Well, I mean, that like hypergamy theory, grounded in evolutionary psychology, gave a basis to make those predictions. The data fits it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's something you've brought up before with respects to Lord Akkad, that if you concede biological components, it's somehow equivalent with conceding, you can't change stuff. Now, one thing people that Razorblade Canny has brought up and many others is that, somehow we've learned to contain our violent actions. No, we don't we don't we don't just randomly hit people as if, and that first off, there's an assumption that most people are just going to randomly hit, or rather hit people just to get what they want. Some people will, some people won't. But that is indicative of the ability of men en masse to change. Now, I
Yeah.
would posit that there are many more men than actual MGTOW have been exposed to MGTOW ideas and philosophy, and for whatever reason, it doesn't appeal to them. It is a specific kind of man, and even within that context, there's so many degrees of how much you're going to go your own way that takes that path. And I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this.
I mean, most recently, the similar argument that I heard was one from Turd Flinging Monkey, where he basically posited that the very existence of MGTOW men basically disproved a biological origin for gynocentrism, because if it was biological, if it was biological and we couldn't change it, MGTOW men wouldn't exist. I mean, to me, that's a ludicrous argument. I mean, that's like saying
It's a
the
composition
existence.
fallacy against, once again.
Yeah, well, the existence of MGTOW men doesn't, disprove a biological basis any more than, the existence of suicides disproves a biological basis for, the desire to preserve oneself. I mean, specifically as far as violence is concerned, I think it's simply a matter of people have to exist within the reality. Like, people have to deal with the reality that they're faced with. If you're violent, you will go to prison. When that isn't the case, when the environment is different, those behaviors can express themselves differently, and you end up with something like the example we spoke about before in Deuteronomy, where back in those days it was well within your right to take what you want by violent force if necessary.
Yeah, it was normative behavior. And once again, to bring this point up, it was also gynocentric behavior to cut down and slaughter the men and bring home the loot and the booty, the booty and the booty. So you would keep the women. And I think Gerweitzwood had pointed this out in an older video, that even if a woman is considered just a precious object or a treasure, it's still a lot more valuable than a dented tin cup, which I guess you would just chuck away. You see, what you see is a great deal of adaptive ability, and you see changes in behavior. And furthermore, I mean, this is a video I've been working on off and on for a long time, but as a foretaste, if you will. Much of our violent inclinations have been rechanneled. It's not that
Yeah.
we're no longer doing. I mean, for example, I like playing a game where I shoot people in the chest and the body, and many of us play shooter games. Some people like Mortal Kombat. You ever seen some of the fatalities? There is a bloodlust in human beings that used to be present in things that we don't do anymore. Cockfighting. We just have dog pit fighting for pit bulls, and gladiatorial games, witch burnings, public executions, etc., etc. This has been redirected. It's not that we no longer have these impulses. So we've learned to redirect those impulses, fair enough, but they're still there, and they're being taken care of, if you will, by means of another source. As far as the problem with the whole, the existence of MGTOW men, this is a very small group of men. Now, call me a defeatist if you will, but most human beings are not aware of why they're doing things, how they're doing things, and they don't care to learn about that. And that applies to men and women. I have to say, there are probably many more men that have been exposed to MGTOW ideas. I know I have acquaintances and friends who have, and they just don't find it appealing for whatever reason.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people, I mean, not to sort of bring it up again, but obesity example is perfect for this. I mean, there you have, studies showing that people that lose a lot of weight can own like only 10% of the people who lose the weight will be able to maintain that weight loss over 5 years. If you were like, let's just say best case scenario, like ignore the fact that obesity is something that people don't want to be. People want to be healthy and good looking. So if we just ignore the fact that I don't think most people want to give up gynocentrism and treat it as exactly as bad as obesity is, if you were to expose the entire population to these kind of concepts, you're still only looking at best a 10% shift in behavior.
Yeah. And I think describing, I think there is a kind of conflict of interest or vision. I'm not personally, of course I make mistakes and I make inaccurate observations sometimes. I try not to, but I'm not willing to compromise truth and an accurate depiction of reality for the sake of creating the false flame of hope. I'm not necessarily accusing RBK of that, but that
I'll
is...
accuse him of it.
Okay, then go on record. Coltaine...
I'll straight up accuse him of it.
Okay.
I think that RBK is an MRA before he is MGTOW. I mean, I look at all of his content. It's like sort of flamey response videos. Like I look at his recent Father's First campaign. If he didn't explicitly say that he was MGTOW, consistently say that, I would look at his channel and straight up think it was a middle-of-the-road MRA channel.
Okay, folks, you heard it there. Not from me, but rather from Coltaine, High Chief of Wombat Containment. For those of you who know what wombats are.
That's fine. I mean, if you want to be an MRA, fucking have at it. But yeah, I look at RBK stuff, and I think he is an MRA first and a man going his own way second.
Okay, that's your view. I mean, look, for me, I can only speak for myself. I'm not willing to compromise what I view as objective truth, and like I said, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. In my attempt to discern objective truth, in order to create a false sense of hope in men or human beings in general. I want to take on reality on its own terms, and I want to extract the good from reality, whatever good there might be, on its own terms. I don't want to extrapolate from reality things that aren't there, and I don't want to add to reality the chimerical or the fantastical. And that's kind of what my channel's about. I'm interested in understanding the world and specifically human beings usually, and I approach different aspects of it. Sometimes I'll talk about gender relations, language, etc. That's what I do, and that's how I help men. And some men,
basically, you're a scientist, not a politician.
Well, I'm not
colloquially
speaking. I mean, I try to apply the scientific method to what I'm doing, and there is a distinction. Look, in my forthcoming video, which will be released guaranteed probably either the 1st or 2nd of next month, where I talk about some very common logical fallacies, the problem is that rhetorical language and emotion are often far more effective in convincing people than is straight up logical thinking or what have you. And we all engage in artifacts of rhetoric occasionally, but generally speaking, I prefer to approach reality in a certain way and deal with issues in a certain way. And I think I've even called it sort of a crusher of hope before. I mean, fine, if that's what I am. I'm just not willing to compromise on the way reality is. And I think that is, generally speaking, the position of Girl Writes What as well. I think Girl Writes What, and once again, let me go on record. I'm, of course, going to be accused of white knighting for Girl Writes What, whatever. I don't even consider Girl Writes What a friend. I consider Coltaine a friend. We talk frequently. I talk to her twice a year, maybe. I'm pretty good terms with her. But I just see her as just trying to represent reality and describe things. And she is for MGTOW. She's for, men doing whatever the fuck they want to do. She's for people who are doing whatever the fuck they want to do. But she's not willing to compromise on a descriptive model of reality that's accurate in the process. And I think there's conflation there to say, because what arises from that, if you misinterpret it, is that, well, she's saying it's impossible. She's a defeatist. She's giving up. And she spends so much time anti-feminism, something I don't even do. I'm under the radar of most feminists because they don't want to fucking get involved in my long meandering videos for the most part. Look at all the stuff she does. That video was I don't know why he made that video, but I think we can agree that there are very different approaches here. There's not much overlap, and that's fine. That's fine. I consider Razorblade Candy a MGTOW, but he does seem to have MRA interest as well. I don't have any of that. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my thing is, I mean, you can be both. You can be a MGTOW and an MRA, but like I said before, I mean, you can be an atheist with no logical underpinning for that, lack of belief. I think in RBK's case, he is going his own way, but I mean, you look at the primary focus of most of the content on his channel, it seems to be very MRA centric. Like I said, like his recent Fathers First campaign, like that is, I'd say that sort of stuff is way more MRA than typical MGTOW content.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. As I said, there's not much overlap, and that's why I thought the video addressing me was kind of odd, because I just don't have much territorial overlap with the stuff that RBK talks about, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Of course, you can interpret that video as some sort of dictate, and coming from me, it was a recommendation to like-minded MGTOW men.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my question, I guess, is and remains. I mean, he's gone after Karen Strawn, and now you. Is he going to make a video addressing Barbarossa? Because I mean, Barbarossa says the exact same things you do. On that comment I left for RBK on his video, I actually linked and time coded a video, an older video by Barbarossa, which is, the title of the video is "Stop Arguing with Women," where he basically says exactly the same things you do, that arguing against feminism is a waste of time. I don't know. Do you think RBK is going to respond to Barbarossa as well? Call him out?
I have no idea, and honestly, it doesn't interest me. One thing the audience, I think, must have gleaned: I'm not interested in a series of endless back and forth responses. I want to, press on to making the kind of videos I want to make, and I think ultimately the kind of videos the majority, at least, of my subscribers appreciate. Stuff exploring different areas of knowledge, etc. So, whether he makes a video covering the Barbarossa thing, I don't know, but I'm probably not going to watch it. Especially recently, nothing against RBK, but there's not a whole lot of overlap, and the videos he makes just generally don't interest me very much. So that's just my take on that. If he does, good for him. If not, whatever. But I think it's just important to clarify basically, essentially, what a realist is: someone trying to align his beliefs and views with reality. And it's also important to define what a deterministic system is, and then you slap on the biological, and then it just becomes clear. They're not synonymous with. This is not synonymous with defeatism, and once again, with the violence examples, we see a redirection, a rechanneling. This is not necessarily parallel with some of the gynocentric stuff. And more importantly, this is something you've been working on off and on as a side project. I think MGTOW as sort of a form of, or something that could be fitted into Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, I think survival is the most basic premise, and MGTOW men see, for whatever their motivation reasons might be, see conventional relationships, marriage, etc., as something that's dangerous to their lives and survival. And so in that context, it makes perfect biological sense to say, well, look, this is dangerous to my life. I'm going to stay away from it,
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, on the violence thing, I mean, it's it does come down to survival and what you need to do to survive. I mean, we've we've learnt not to take things from each other and hit people, but if the whole world went Mad Max tomorrow, you watch how quickly that would change.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
shit, it doesn't even need to do that. Like, the wrong team wins the hockey and Canada riots.
Yeah, I mean, as anyone's even familiar with some of the football hooliganism that takes place in the UK, there are a lot of good documentaries on that, by the way, in case you're interested. It's crazy. I mean, this is a separate topic, tribalism, etc. But all these things are either manifested differently or remanifested in
Yeah.
modernity. Games that have violence, decapitations, etc. These are things. I mean, I'm hinting at this video, which will be released sometime in the future. I mean, human beings on some level enjoy violence, and we have redirected that enjoyment to an avenue where it's just safer. If
Yeah.
I'm playing Skyrim and I decapitate a bandit or even an innocent, quote unquote innocent person in that game, there's no real harm. It's all digital. It's all in the game. But
Mm.
I'm not going to deny it's pretty fucking cool to decapitate people, and kill moves are something I enjoy performing, just like I
Mm.
like getting kill streaks in a shooter game.
Yeah.
This is just a redirection, and
Mm.
in the case of gynocentrism, well, we've just seen different manifestations in ancient history and in ancient times. You
Yeah.
take the booty and you take the booty, and you kill the men. And these days, it's a little bit different. You jump in front of bullets, so women in the cinema won't die, etc., etc. It's the same. It's the same source. It's the same origin.
Yeah.
And turf-flinging monkeys example, I think, once again, is a composition fallacy. We have some subsector of humanity, MGTOW men, therefore gynocentrism is just some sort of social construct.
Mm.
I
Well,
can't get on board with that.
he actually says something that specifically relates to what you're saying about redirection as well. Obviously, I didn't. In my video, I just wanted to try and stick to the core issue of gynocentrism in nature. But one of the things that he says, one of his arguments in his video was that it's obviously not biological when you compare it to something like the need for sex. That's like the desire for sex is an ever-present biological urge, whereas he says gynocentrism isn't biological because all you have to do to get over it is watch a couple of YouTube videos and you're cured. I'm like, well, hang on now. I mean, I can't speak for other people, but I still get urges myself, not that for companionship and things that aren't. It's not just sex, that male mother need. Like, you still feel it. I remember the interview between John the Other and Barbarossa from a couple of months ago, where John the Other was saying that that guy has been in the fucking manosphere for years and years, and he was riding his bicycle home at night and he saw a man and a woman having an argument, and he stopped to see if everything was okay, and he said he specifically stopped to see if the girl was okay. And then it wasn't until he did it that he realized I should really check if the guy is okay. He had to actually consciously correct himself. I mean, it's not something that just goes away.
Yeah, and I think Gerwitz what pointed this out in an ancient video of hers, and she said if this whole thing were just a social construct, it would be so much easier to get rid of.
Mm.
And I think therein you see also the degrees of how much men decide to go their own ways, whether they decide to just completely swear off of it, become, as the illustrious Sandman claimed, MGTOW monks taking vows of poverty and wallowing in filth and misery. I am the highest exponent, the high priest, or something somewhere a middle road.
Mm.
That's part of that. It's not easy to completely shut down these things, and it's for many it's just a constant battle,
Yeah.
this is how deeply rooted this stuff is in ourselves, and if that makes
Well,
me or you a crusher of hope, then so be it.
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, hope. I always like the thing the Greek philosophers said that hope was the last thing to come out of Pandora's box.
Yeah, or as I like to say, hope, oftentimes at least, I'm adding is the denial of reality. It is the carrot dangled before the draft horse in a vain attempt to keep it prodded on. And the politicians use this all the time. It is a trick and artifact of language very often that doesn't, and that unfortunately doesn't often correlate to what reality actually is. And that I'm not willing to go that far so as to create false hope, if you will. Look, if that's defeatism, whatever. I'm not, as I said, not interested in the back and forth with RBK. I don't really do response videos for the most part. I just want to get back to business and do what I want to do. But it is and was important to clarify what certain things are and what things aren't. And I'll post a link to that, what we are, society is what we are video, which is a pretty simple video, but it just points out this key idea of biological precedence, that you can't have a society that exists in a vacuum independent of biology. Everything that society becomes will be some sort of manifestation of what we used to be in the past. And it's going to vary. If you go to some of these primitive Amazonian tribes that are still, butchering each other in order to get access to resources and women, and yeah, that's going to be a different society to highbrow Sydney upper class whatever, but still there'll be different manifestations. Ultimately, though, we can look for an explanation in our past and find the origin of it, I think. Anything else you'd like to say in closing?
Oh, no, I think we've pretty well covered everything we needed to.
I think we covered pretty much everything. So, everyone, thanks for watching. Next video will not appear until the beginning of next month. As I said, it's pretty much done, the logical fallacy video, working a bunch of different things. And once again, Coltaine, High Chief and Warden of Wombats, he is back in full force. I will be posting a link to that video. He's also working, I believe, you're still working on a response to RBK, was that correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. I suppose we've covered some of it in this conversation, but I want to lay it out in a proper, coherent video, I guess.
Yeah, and there are other things that he'd like to work on. I mean, he has a very sharp mind, and I think we can expect to see a lot of high quality, insightful content from him in the future. So as always, thanks for watching, and hey, most importantly, don't forget to take your vows of poverty, because it's very important to wallow in filth and misery. Thus spake the high priest of MGTOW monks. Everyone take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.